He explained that they worked in the same department and asked to enter. The girl opened the door with a smile and invited them to enter the apartment, which was shining with cleanliness. They were in the hallway. Yeji pressed her hands to her chest and admired the cleanliness. The main character's daughter closed her eyes, smiled widely and said that they would be having dinner soon, so her father's colleague should drink a cup of tea and leave. She continued to smile. When Dojan said that he invited Yeji to dinner, Yuni turned away, crossed her arms over her chest and made a displeased grimace but did not argue. She seethed with rage when Dojan said that she was acting this way because she was an adolescent. Yeji opened her mouth in surprise as she watched what was happening. The main character's daughter lowered her eyes and pouted her lips in displeasure. The red-haired girl looked carefully at Dojan's daughter. Suspicions crept into her head. It was evening outside and the city streets were lit with lanterns. 3 people were sitting at the table. Yeji smiled contentedly and praised Yuna's culinary skills, surprised that she knew how to cook spicy cabbage soup. But the girl dryly replied that she bought it. She was confused and started asking about the other dishes, but they were all bought at the store. Yeji was sweating with excitement. She opened her mouth wide intending to say something, but something caught Yuna's attention. She looked at the sword case. Yeji revealed that she was an F-rank hunter. Her eyes sparkled happily. She raised her finger and said that the carrying case was made in the Schultz workshop. She put her palms to her mouth in fear when she realized that she had said too much from excitement. Sweat appeared on her face again. She turned around and looked guiltily at Dojan. He held dirty dishes in his hands. His eyes sparkled ominously. Dark energy emanated from him. Yeji stuttered an apology. The girl looked at her in bewilderment. She did not understand how an ordinary employee and a huntress could work together. The girl slouched guiltily. Dojan threw the dirty dishes into the sink and without turning to face them said that he worked part-time as a hunter and if this became known, she would face a fine. He asked his daughter not to tell anyone about this. She slammed her hand on the table. Her eyes widened in fear, her mouth was open, she shuddered not knowing what to expect. Yeji froze a look of fake delight on her face as the girl grabbed her hands and called her amazing, saying that she wanted to be a huntress too. The happy girl showed her the document and said that she would soon enter the Hunter Academy. The red-haired girl felt awkward. She put her fingers together, said that she did not need to be praised because she had a very low rank. The girl continued to look at her with delight. Her gaze made her feel uncomfortable. The girl said that rank is not the main thing, but what is important is that she managed to pass the exam. Dojan turned to the cheerfully chatting girls and sighed heavily. His adopted daughter was asking Yeji about her fighting style. Lights were burning in the windows of a multi-story building. Clouds were floating across the dark sky and the girl was getting ready to go home. They stood on the street near the elevator. Yeji apologized for being a guest for so long. Dojan's daughter smiled. She smiled back. The girl said that she had a lot of fun today. She closed her eyes, waved her hand and said that she would wait for the next meeting. The girl with an innocent expression asked her not to come again. Her answer surprised Yeji with an even more innocent expression on her face. The girl said that she still didn't like her. She adjusted the strap of the cover on her back and laughed awkwardly. Dojan turned to his adopted daughter and told her to go home because he would walk Yeji to the subway. She felt even more awkward. The girl agreed with a sweet smile burning inside with irritation. They walked along the streets of the night city. Dojan froze in surprise when his colleague said that the girl was not his own daughter. He opened his mouth in surprise and asked what she meant. He was shocked when Yeji started twirling her fingers and listing off the things she had learned, such as the inappropriate age difference between him and Yuni, the missing ring, and the missing family photos at home. She closed her eyes, smiled widely and said that they had different surnames, which means she was not his own daughter and he had never been married. He looked down in shock. Yeji asked about his relationship with his daughter. The girl took out her phone and prepared to call the police. She looked both confused and suspicious as she asked if something dangerous was going on between him and his adopted daughter. Dojan assured her that she had nothing to worry about. He closed his eyes, lowered his head, and said that she is his niece. He is raising her because his brother has problems. Yeji's eyes widened in surprise and she felt ashamed of her behavior. They continued to walk to the subway. The girl apologized for the large number of questions she did. Dojan asked her not to talk about it at work. She waved her hand, thanked him, and said goodbye. Dojan already had his back to her. He said goodbye without turning around. The girl looked in bewilderment at the man in the brown coat. Her eyes widened in sudden realization, realizing that Dojan and his brother had different surnames. She raised an eyebrow in surprise, continuing to stare at the leaving man. She continued to wave with a stupid expression on her face. She did not understand the situation but decided that in any case she had to go home. There was a clock hanging on the light wall of the 3-story City Hall building. The boss opened his mouth in surprise as he looked through the papers. He couldn't believe that Dojan did this in one day. The man in a white shirt and pink tie clenched his teeth and looked at the main character in fear. When he asked if there was any problem, sweat appeared on the man's face. He opened his mouth and said that everything was done perfectly, but compiling such data takes at least several months, so he doubts that Dojan worked alone. The man with the book in his hands turned to Heo and asked if he had helped his subordinate. The man with glasses smiled and praised his subordinate. He said that now he would have to catch up with him. The main character closed his eyes and bowed, thanking his senior for his praise. He tensed when a smiling Yi approached him. She assumed that he had done a very good work. The boss made a joyful gesture. He was delighted with the appearance of the huntress. Dojan looked displeased and asked why she came, because she was supposed to have a day off. She smiled and said that she was just passing by. She pressed her hands to her chest. The dissatisfied man sat down at the table with the computer. He said that she could do as she wanted because there would be no overtime anyway. He clenched his teeth and looked with hostility at the outstretched piece of paper. He took the paper in his hands. He looked at the document over his shoulder with curiosity. Dojan asked what it was. His subordinate smiled and said that this was the hunter qualification exam schedule, because now that he had a ward he should know such things. She thought about how all hunters take an exam to assess their level once a year. It presented Latin letters and a red arrow according to the exam results. The hunter's level can either increase or decrease. He carefully studied the contents of the document because this exam was very important for every hunter. He presented many banners with different symbols. They belonged to various guilds that were constantly looking for high-level hunters. There were several hundred such organizations in South Korea alone. He thought of the old man in the suit who was handing the card to the man. He knew that during this period hunters often move from one guild to another, so the day of the exam is often called the opening of the transfer market. Dojan was very surprised when his senior covered his mouth with his hand and secretly told him that the boss was very worried about this. He opened his mouth and asked if the boss was afraid that the hunter would move to another guild if he raised his level. Hayaku confirmed his guess. A man with glasses sat at the table. He looked at the computer screen and said that in any case Yeji needed to pass the certification and Dojan had better go with him. He found the huntress on the list. She was supposed to perform in a week in the first group. He looked at the girl displeased and asked if she was going to move to another guild if she increased her level. She waved her hands and said that she wanted her contract to be extended. She closed her eyes and pursed her lips as he turned away and said that someone else was handling those tasks. He lowered his head, opened his mouth and said that she needed to raise the level to certification because it would be more convenient for him to go on assignments and her salary could be raised. He was looking forward when the girl said that she would get an F rank anyway. He turned around and looked at her with confusion. The red-haired girl explained that she could not use mana. The certification was divided into several stages and the result depended on the total score. She presented a blue crystal and said that the most important thing in the exam is the amount of mana because the mana crystal increases the physical strength of the hunter. She thought about how the golden light surrounded the person's body. This was the acceptance of mana that she could not achieve. Dojan closed his eyes and scratched his forehead thoughtfully. He understood that the huntress could not count on a level higher than E. She closed her eyes and fingered her fingers. Her lips pressed into a thin line when Dojan said that if she didn't try, she wouldn't know what she was capable of. But the girl was sure that she was destined to live with an F rank. She raised her eyes and looked at him in surprise when he said that then he too was doomed to be stuck at an F rank. He stood up, pushed the chair back with his hand, walked towards her and said that he has only one hunter in his care and the level of faults that he can explore depends on his level. Yeji lowered her eyes. She said that if he found another hunter, he could move forward. He lowered his head, put his hand to his chin and said that she was right and he needed to put up an ad looking for another hunter. Her eyes widened in surprise. Her mouth dropped open when Dojan said that. She was the only hunter for him now and told her to follow him in the corridor. With light walls there was a sign for a training room for hunters. They walked inside. Yeji looked at the room with her mouth open. The man flipped the switch and said that it was an office for working with old faults which was converted into a training room. In the room, there were various types of bladed weapons and several mannequins. Dojan admitted that this was his first time here. He knocked on the wall and explained that the hall was built from special materials provided by the Hunter Academy, so the walls were quite resistant to impacts. He looked at her. He opened his mouth and started talking about the girl's lack of mana. She closed her eyes and smiled shyly when he suggested trying physical strengthening. Yeji explained that she couldn't get mana until she reached level 3. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes when she admitted that she was a complete failure. He crossed his arms over his chest and asked to demonstrate her fencing skills. The girl began to dig in her bag. She said that she had notes. She handed him a notebook with a purple cover. Dojan thanked her. The girl smiled contentedly. When he opened the notebook and praised her for taking a lot of notes. On the page it was written in a line that the universe contains the 3 entities, the source of intersection heaven, earth, and the 3 principles of man. Yeji admitted that she herself did not fully understand the meaning of what was written. He continued reading. The girl smiled shyy and said that at the end there were sketches of techniques. Dojan with downcast eye chuckled thoughtfully. There was a line drawing of a person in different poses on the sheet. Yeji said that she was bad at drawing. Dojan ignored her words and said that it was like the 3-way method. She also looked at the notebook and was surprised that he saw the 3-way method in the drawings, not fencing. He patiently explained that fencing was a technique developed based on the 3-way method. He imagined a man with flowing hair and traditional clothes. It was the swordsman Jinak at the top of the mountain. There were 2 men, one of them was sitting on the ground and the other was pointing a sword towards other. Dojan said that Jin Sewon was the genius of the palace who appeared like a passing comet and disappeared after the conquest of Murim. He rethought the 3-way sand method. The man lying on the ground with his mouth open looked at his opponent in fear. Dojan talked about how people called his method fencing and leaving his advice and teaching on the technique disappeared. The man sighed. Yeji continued to smile but became inwardly wary when he addressed her. He put his hands on her shoulders. The girl's cheeks turned pink with embarrassment. When he leaned over and said that she was a rare lucky one, her green eyes widened in surprise, her mouth fell open, she did not understand what he was talking about. The round clock hung on a white wall. The man in the white shirt and pink tie smiled widely. The needle approached 12. The man opened his eyes wide in anticipation. Then the hand stopped at 12, which meant that it was exactly 6 o'clock in the evening. The young man stood up from the table and said that he was heading home. The girl with red hair ran out of the office saying goodbye to her colleagues. The man in the pink tie raised his mug to his mouth asking why their junior colleagues had been disappearing at exactly 6:04. Several days in a row. He assumed that there was something between them. The worker with the rectangular glasses smiled and replied that there was indeed something on Yeji's part. He put on a black jacket and said that only a fool would Not have guessed about it. The man with the mug in his hands smiled slightly and said that Dojan did not suspect anything. The girl with red hair waved her weapon and screamed loudly. She brought the sword to her face, which emitted a bright blue glow. Yeji then jumped up, her hair disheveled. The girl cut the air with her weapon. She fell to one knee, raising her hand up. She then stood up and turned around, holding the weapon tightly. Yeji looked at her palms in surprise and thought that she could feel mana. She looked at the screen where information about her abilities was recorded. Yeji was level 3 in S rank and she had the passive skill of a swordsman. The main character clapped his hands and praised the girl's result, which she achieved in just a week. Yeji turned around and said with a joyful smile that meeting him was a real success. Dojan raised his head with pride and replied that he would take this into account when renewing her contract. Yi's cheeks turned red as she closed her eyes and smiled. She then opened her green eyes and gazed at the main character. He put his hands in his pockets and the girl asked if he was hiding his strength. Dojan closed his eyes and sighed. He then turned around and said goodbye to Yeji as she waved to him. The next day, the building of the Hunter Academy was illuminated by the rays of the sun. At the entrance there were many people chatting among themselves. The main character asked if Yeji was taking part in the certification for the first time, and the girl answered with a smile that she had already gone through the entire procedure for passing the Hunter exam, but after that she never took it again. She closed her eyes and thanked Dojan as he wished her luck and told her that she had been training hard. The main character and Yeji turned around at the same time when the young man in armor loudly shouted about someone's arrival. Han Minji and Kang Minhyuk walked side by side. They were wearing armor and were S-rank VIPs. People walked up to the red carpet, looking at the two in admiration. Minji closed her eyes and asked permission to pass with a smile. Minhyuk furrowed his eyebrows thoughtfully. Dojan asked if these people were some kind of celebrities and Yeji widened her eyes in surprise that he didn't know them. Then the girl said with a smile that Minji and Minhyuk are hunters from the Icarus Guild and also one of the strongest hunters in the whole world. The main character raised his dark eyes looking at them. A crimson aura emanated from Minji and Minhyuk. Yeji's mouth dropped open in shock when he said that these hunters were nothing special and could be caught up in a year if she tried hard enough. People in the crowd laughed and the girl began to sweat with embarrassment. Then she covered her face, which was red with shame, with her hands and asked the main character not to say such things again. Minhyuk gritted his teeth in displeasure, asking why they should do business here as well, and Minji with a smile told him to watch his face because there were a lot of cameras nearby. The young man immediately fell silent and made a neutral expression on his face. The girl turned to him and said that it was still more interesting here than going out hunting and getting dirty in the blood of monsters. She narrowed her eyes and added that besides, she said that this time some genius will probably appear. Minhyuk opened in surprise and his cheeks turned red suddenly. Minji ran forward shouting that they wouldn't get a seat if they were late. The young man was left standing alone with two hunters behind him. The man with shaved temples smiled greasily, saying that Minji was waiting for him. He frowned his thick black eyebrows and said that he was impatient. He clenched his hands into fists and shouted angrily at his comrades, who began to laugh at him. A man in a blue suit raised his hand and announced the start of counting statistics and also told the hunters to enter in order. Dojan leaned over to E and said that they need to go there. He grinned and laughed, telling Icarus to wait for him. People crowded around the entrance where a bright light came out. The hunter with the black beard began to sweat and excitement showed on his face. He opened his mouth in shock when information appeared on the screen that he was a C rank. He laughed joyfully. People around him began to support him. Gildan, the personal manager of the Balkan Guild, greeted the hunter with a polite smile. He raised his hand and explained that their guild consisted mainly of C-rank hunters, and for D rank, they provided all the necessary weapons and costumes for free. Yeji closed her eyes as she tried to push through the crowd. She rested her hands on her knees and breathed heavily. As the man in the brown coat asked if she had passed the test, the girl smiled, showed a peace sign and said that she had received a D. She clenched her hands into fists and shouted joyfully that her mana had increased. The main character closed his eyes and congratulated her. They stood at the open door and decided to go further. The man in armor shouted loudly, holding a sword in his hand. Yeji was wearing a black suit and holding a long saber. She was next in line. The girl turned around and with a worried look asked if she could really try her hand at C rank. Dojan scratched his cheek and replied that now Yeji could easily cope with a C rank monster. The girl trembled with fear and asked where he got such confidence. He touched his chin and told her to just trust him. From a speaker hanging on the wall, an announcement was heard that access to the rift would now open for the third group of rank C. Yeji took the weapon in two hands and walked away with an uncertain step. Dojan told her to prepare properly. The girl stopped, just flying around. She looked up thinking that so many people were looking at her and she was worried. She widened her green eyes in fear when someone loudly called her name. Yeji froze like a statue when her past mate approached her and asked what she was doing there. She turned around, her face sweating with embarrassment, then she shyly lowered her head, unable to answer the man's question. He frowned and angrily yelled at her, asking if Yeji had decided to test her powers. He wrinkled his nose, asking if she was crazy. The girl closed her eyes and apologized. He touched his forehead, saying that this was the first time he had seen an F-rank hunter try to fight at sea level. The men turned around in confusion when they heard this. Yeji looked at the floor as they discussed how her suit was of a lower level. He crossed his arms and asked what Yeji hoped for. Suddenly the man's eyes widened in shock. He looked around and asked if that terrible man was nearby. Dojan stood near the gray door and was silent. He looked to the side when he heard someone's voice. Minhyuk stared at him and said that Yeji is a contract hunter at the mayor's office and Dojan is the person in charge. Minhyuk frowned when he realized that the main character wasn't even surprised by his knowledge. Dojan stood half-turned and remained silent. Minhyuk said that he would get straight to the point, and the main character looked at him indifferently. A young man with disheveled hair and a scar on his face said that they wanted to invite Yeji to their guild. He frowned and added that the girl had never undergone physical strengthening. Minhyuk placed his hand on the railing and added that this is the first time that such a thing has happened, that when certifying with the help of an F-rank crystal, it was possible to increase the mana indicators to 10 points at one time. He looked closely at the main character and said that there was not a single record of Yeji strengthening herself after this and that it was a monstrous talent. Dojan calmly looked at Minhyuk and thought that this was not an infiltration. The young man with a scar on his face said that the Icarus Guild would give her wings, provide her with a class of suit, and she would also be able to learn from the knowledge and experience of her senior colleagues, participate in raids on the most difficult faults, and gain practical experience. Minhyuk's gaze became stern as he asked what the main character could offer the girl. Dojan closed his eyes while Yeji stood with a weapon in her hands. Minhyuk added that she had been doing this for almost a year and the main character had already sent her to a C rank rift with no experience in raids above the D rank. He frowned his black eyebrows and asked if Dojan really hopes that the girl will master this level. In the window, they could be seen silently looking at each other. The activation of his C rank rift was announced. The door slowly opened, revealing the feet of an orc warrior. A crowd of monsters with green skin and bright red eyes entered the battlefield. Hun reached for his weapon with a grin, excited for the test to begin. Yeji frowned and tightened her grip on the hilt of her saber. Here were lamps on the ceiling and fire alarms hanging. Dojan looked tiredly at Minhyuk, who said that Yeji should come to them if she wants to learn to survive. He approached the main character and said that this is the case if he really thinks about the girl. Dojan closed his eyes and scratched his cheek. He then looked at his interlocutor seriously and replied that Yeji is not a thing, so he cannot dispose of it. Then he smiled mysteriously and suggested making a bet. Minhyuk furrowed his eyebrows in confusion. The orcs were armed. They were approaching the Hun. The guy frowned and ordered Yeji to pull herself together. The monster opened its fang mouth wide and screamed fiercely. The guy began to sweat drops, saying that he was in vain and deciding to go to C rank. The orc jumped and swung his club. A white mark appeared in the air from a quick blow. The man used the sledgehammer to defend himself from the attacks of an angry monster. The guy clenched his teeth and closed one eye in tension. He opened his mouth in horror, not understanding why the orc was so strong. The man fell to one knee and let out a painful wee. He closed his eyes and screamed that he couldn't do it anymore. The monster punched him in the cheek and hand and dropped his hammer, then he fell on his back. He screamed in fear when he saw that his weapon was far away from him. Meanwhile, the monster smiled terribly, swinging a wooden club. The man put his palm out in front of him and yelled loudly, asking the orc to wait. Yeji flew towards the monster with a loud scream. The orc looked in bewilderment at the girl, who fell to the ground. The guy widened his eyes in shock as he looked at her. Yeji stood up from the ground, raised her rapier and screamed for the man to move back so she could deal with the monster. The guy looked at her in surprise, not understanding what she was talking about. The orc screamed fiercely, clutching a club in his hand. He swung his weapon, but Yeji managed to jump away. The monster twirled its club in the air, trying to hit the target. The girl carefully followed the orc's movements and realized that she could see his line of attack. Her green eyes were fixed on the enemy. Suddenly Yeji quickly moved and found herself behind the monster. White stripes from quick blows became visible in the air and the orc squealed loudly. He looked to the side as an attack flashed in front of him. Suddenly his small eyes widened in surprise. The orc raised his head and saw him approaching him from above. The girl ran her hand along the blade of her sharp weapon. Using the first move of the fencing school, Yeji attacked the ogre while falling, and a bright red streak appeared behind her saber. The girl grinned, her hair disheveled. The audience leaned closer, mouths open in shock. His teammates also looked at Yeji in shock. The guy raised his thick eyebrows. He was stunned. The main character closed his eyes and smiled. Min-hyuk frowned and shouted that it was impossible. The main character sighed, asking why the young man was so surprised. There are 3 ways to use mana, and one of them is to invest mana in a weapon. In such cases it glows. The second way is to release mana when it flows out of the source. And the third method is the method of mana replacement, when energy flows can replace each other. Investing mana into weapons is not that difficult. The most important thing is to control this process. Min-hyuk's eyes widened, admiring how Yeji used this technique so easily. An announcement was made from the speakers hanging on the ceiling that the exam was over. The guy rose from the ground and took the hammer in his hand. He raised his eyebrows, asking how this could happen. Then the man raised his head and narrowed his eyes. On the screen was the team's ranking. Yeji was in first place with 8 points and the guy was in last place with no points. The red-haired girl came out of the arena and called the main character. Yeji smiled and thanked him, but he said that she did it through intense training. The girl fell silent when she saw Min-hyuk in front of her. He closed his eyes and said with a smile that it was a worthy battle. Yeji shyly turned away, scratched her cheek and mentioned that Min-hyuk hadn't rank. The young man looked at the girl carefully, saying that she was very skillful in using the technique, and asked if she had a teacher. The main character stood between them and said that Yeji was educating herself. The girl widened her eyes in shock and began to turn around, then she blushed, laughed and said it was true. Yeji's eyes widened in fear when Min-hyuk called her. He frowned and invited her to join the Icarus Guild.